Okay, so let's take a look at how the HTTP service works. Remember, we have the event controller that was calling the event data service, and the event data service was just creating an object in line. We talked about how we'd like to actually retrieve that object via AJAX, so let's go ahead and do that using the HTTP service. So we're going to inject the HTTP service into our event data service. And let's go ahead and we're going to rename this to getEvent. So it's going to be a function. And let's get rid of this data. So we now have a event data service that has a getEvent function, and we are going to make an HTTP call as part of this function. So we're going to call the HTTP service. We're going to pass into it the get method and the URL of the resource we're seeking. That URL, data/event/1, by the way, is not currently pointing to a valid location. Our web server doesn't currently have an endpoint to serve data at that URL. We'll add that shortly. For now, we have to supply a success method. So what happens when the HTTP AJAX call succeeds? That returns, on success, it returns all that data. And then we need to provide a error callback also. Okay, so what do we want to do upon success? Well, because the HTTP call is asynchronous, we can't just return it. So what we need to do is when we call the getEvent function, we need to pass in a success callback that we can call when this succeeds. And let's pass back to that callback the data that we received back from the AJAX call. And then here in the error, let's just log some data. But instead of just using console.log, let me just quickly show you how the log service works from Angular. Log essentially is just used for diagnostic purposes and for writing to the console log. So in this case, let's write out a warning, and we'll pass in the data, status, headers, and config. Now let's come back over to our event controller, and let's call the getEvent method. And remember, that takes in a callback to call when it succeeds. We'll just use an inline function for that. And what we'll do when we call that is we will set scope.event equal to the event that's passed back. So now, if we switch over to our browser and refresh, you can see in the console that we're getting a 404 error because our server isn't handling that URL. You can also see that the data that we logged about the error is being output to the console. So let's go update the server to return data at that URL. In the next two clips, we'll show you how to update our Express server and our IIS server to get and save event data. Then we'll come back and show it working in our Angular app. You can choose which of these two clips you want to watch based on whether you are using the Node server or IIS.